Our next speaker has come all the way from Dallas to be with us today. He is the current director of the Office of Communities, Tribes, and Environmental Assessment for Region 6 of the Environmental Protection Agency. Arturo Blanco also served for some years as the chief of the Bureau of Pollution Control and Prevention over at the City of Houston, so he knows our community well. Arturo is going to talk to us today about how Region 6 at the EPA interacts during disasters, and particularly with a focus on environmental justice and outreach to EJ communities during environmental responses. So with that, I'll introduce Arturo Blanco. Thank you. Arturo? Hello, Arturo. Well, maybe ¿dónde está Arturo? Hola. Well, he'll be here in just a minute. Enjoy your coffee. An extra 30 seconds of your break. I guess when I called everybody in, I wasn't loud enough. There he is, Arturo Blanco from the Environmental Protection Agency. Arturo, thank you. I didn't give you enough time. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Hello, everybody. Good morning. Thank you for having me here. I appreciate the Harris County Attorney's Office inviting EPA to come and share with you what EPA Region 6 is doing with respect to involving environmental justice in our emergency response. I'll be happy to talk about a little bit of give a little bit of context to the work we do, to what Harris County represents, and how we go about working with everyone in the programs and in the communities to try to facilitate and bring help to residents when emergencies happen. I take it that Rock, I was outside and I wasn't trying to run away, by the way. Okay, so I do represent the EPA Region 6 Office of Environmental Justice, Tribal, and Environmental Assessment. So in short, what that means is that we do environmental justice work. We work with 66 federally recognized tribes in EPA Region 6 in 4 states. We do work in 5 states, but the federally recognized tribes are in Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, in Louisiana. We don't have tribes in Arkansas. And also, environmental assessment represents the NEPA work, the reviews that we do of the EISs and those kinds of things, as Jim Blackburn was mentioning earlier. So when it comes to what environmental justice is and what does that mean here in Harris County, when I was asked to come and speak to you about the work we do, what? Does it move automatically?
It was doing that earlier too.
I hadn't touched the computer. So what we did was, okay, so let's take a look and see what's going on in Harris County. We have a tool that we're going to talk about later in the presentation. And by the way, let me also take the opportunity to introduce Omari Burrell. He's from the environmental justice team we have in EPA Region 6, and he will discuss EJ Screen a little bit later. So we took a look at EJ Screen. EJ Screen can do a number of things. It is rich in data. It has demographic and environmental indicators within the data. It uses census tract information from the 2010 census. And so we do different types of queries, and we come up with various data results depending on what it is that we want to know. But what we did run EJ Screen, and we plotted on the graph things such as Superfund sites and brownfields, which a lot of those little squares that you see on the graph represent. Now, when you do use EJ Screen and you have that on your screen on your computer, you can click on each of those squares, and by clicking, you will get information related to what that is. Be it a Superfund site, brownfields, or other type of facility, depending on what you're querying. As you can see, Harris County does involve a lot of activities when it comes to environmental type of challenges that we need to think about and respond to sometimes. Now, so we also took a look at, so what does come from from Harris County with respect to spills, discharges, those kinds of things. Let's do it again. And those kinds of things that are reported to the National Response Center. So we look back at 20 or so years, and since 2002 to the present, we got this graph. I'm not prepared to talk in details about what each of those peaks represent or why, but it does seems to show a positive trend in terms of notifications reported to the National Response Center since almost 20 years ago. And although there have been valleys and peaks, it does seem to go in the right direction. Is the immediate thing that one might think about what the graph is telling us. Now, something else that we did with respect to the National Response Center data that is reported from Harris County. So we broke it down in terms of different communities throughout the county, in terms of municipalities. You see that Houston is a big chunk, but so it is Pasadena and others. So those are just places where those notifications come from, involving many different types of facilities. And with respect to what types of facilities are involved that these emergencies generate from, you can see a breakdown from the data in terms of fixed sources, mobile sources, vessels, and so on. So that gives you an idea of where some of those notifications are coming from. And then if you take a look back at the municipalities, where those facilities are located. Okay, so what does that mean for us in EPA with respect to those notifications and other emergencies? I'm sorry about that, but it keeps flipping. Okay. So when it comes to environmental justice and emergency response, the EPA role with respect to emergency response is responding to many types of things, as you see on the bullet here on the screen. Now, when EPA responds, usually EPA responds at the request of another federal agency or the request of a state agency or at the request of our local agencies. We do coordinate many different types of resources in responding to those requests. One of the things we do typically and frequently is removal actions when it comes to things that are either abandoned, discharged, or what have you, where an immediate response is needed to protect human health and the environment. But EPA does work closely with all of these agencies, and here in Harris County is no exception. We work closely with the county, with the fire marshal, and others. So now it comes to environmental justice, and what does that mean with respect to emergency response? Now, sorry about that again. So when it comes to taking a look at an activity that EPA is responding to, sometimes we have time to prepare, other times we do not. So for example, during Harvey, We knew that there was something coming. We had several days to analyze what we were going to be challenged with, and so we were able to take some actions prior to landfall. Other times, such as when ITC or Chemco or other facilities have an incident, at the spur of a moment, there is no time for preparation, but yet we still have to react. So we have to kind of take that in stock and work with our stakeholders, with our sister agencies, and reach out and have some sort of communication way to know that things are where help is needed, basically. One of the things that we do, again, is looking at EJ screen, and sometimes when necessary, based on our contacting the community stakeholders, in contacting the local officials, and so on, we do deploy or may deploy staff to help, or sometimes we may use those that are already responding as part of an action such as assessing or removing. We work with them or through them to make sure that we are providing some help to those that are having some challenges in their communities. So one thing we do, for example, first off, when there is an event happening, such as just a couple of weeks ago, there was a lot of rain that came down. We had about over 20 inches of rain in the Bowman area. You all had a lot of rain here too in Houston. So we reached out to those that we normally work with, those that we know. We asked for their well-being. We asked for their challenges, such as, for example, were they receiving notice to evacuate, or were they aware that any notices were being given? We try to be a bridge between local officials and communities that we work with, so that we can hopefully facilitate communications, and sometimes that can be a challenge. But we want to make sure that the agencies and residents connect to the practical extent that's necessary. So when it comes to communication, and by the way, and I should have mentioned that earlier, EPA does many things. When it comes to our function in the Environmental Justice Office in EPA Region 6, we bring a more human element, if you will, to the EPA response. You know, EPA is a regulatory agency by nature, and we have many different programs that we deploy to, depending on the kind of response that we need to have. Sometimes it's about monitoring, sometimes it's about mitigating, sometimes it's about air quality or water or what have you. We are not part of that regulatory framework ourselves in EJ. We try to be a connector between those that are in the technical side of the programs with the communities on the ground, so that we can make sure that we have that link when we are responding to an event. So when we talk about communication strategy, that's kind of what I mean. There are things that we try to do so that we make sure that there is a relevant communication channel, such as, for example, we take a look at our EJ network. We take a look at the area where the emergency is happening. We call or email those that are in those areas. We ask about, we let them know, first of all, are they aware? Number two, we ask them how they are. And number three, we ask if they need any help. We also contact our agencies that we work with. And we provide feedback, we get feedback, and so on and so forth. So it's sort of like a network of different types of communications for us to be able to be helpful in whatever response EPA is part of, working with our sister agencies in the area where the emergency is happening. Sometimes depending on the length of the emergency, like for example during Harvey, which took a long time, We provide in this case, an email address where people can send information to. We monitor that information that we receive. We connect with the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, or Harris County, or the City of Houston, or the City of Beaumont, or many others, based on that communication need. So we maintain that active communication ongoing, so that we know that things are sort of moving along and progressing along. If somebody needed help, did they get that help, and so on and so forth. Now, with that said, EJ is, it works within a structure. So when EPA responds, there are many different types of responses. In the case of CHEMCO, for example, I believe the fire marshal asked for EPA assistance. EPA rendered that assistance, did some monitoring, and worked closely with the fire marshal here in Harris County. In other cases, it is the state that requests that help from EPA. But in other cases, there is a unified type command as part of an incident command structure that is established, where EPA comes in and works within those parameters in that structure. Now, so I'm saying all of that to say that EJ as a function falls in step with that. So in the past, that hasn't necessarily been a formal kind of connection in terms of EPA responses, but we still become part of that function, and we work internally and externally. And there are many different players when we try to make sure that everybody's busy, everybody's focused, everybody's trying to get something done. Somebody out there in the community needs help. So in that big web of things happening or going on, that's kind of how we become relevant as part of that huge network of players, so that we have an organized response in providing some assistance out in the communities. At this point in time, I'd like to ask Omari to kind of talk a little bit about the use of EJ Screen, because I think it's important. EJ Screen is a tool that is not very long in terms of its life shelf. It's been working for about 3-4 years for us. It has gotten some improvements along the way, and it has become a little bit more intensive in terms of other types of data that have been incorporated. But it is a good tool to get a first sense of baseline for things that we need to know in terms of an area where we need to come and work with our agencies, sister agencies, and with some sort of data, and then fill that in with local information to make it more effective for us to be able to respond in a relevant way. Omari?
Good morning again. My name is Omari Burrell, and I work with Arturo in our environmental justice program. I just want to talk a little bit about EJ Screen and how we utilize it in our program. One of the beauties of EJ Screen is it's a mapping tool that provides us with a consistent data set and an approach to combining environmental indicators as well as demographic indicators. And so what we're able to do when we combine those two together in EJ Screen, we have these things called EJ indexes. And so with those EJ indexes, we're able to use those and provide information to our communities, provide information to other agencies and so forth as needed. So during Harvey, we were able to take that information and, for instance, we had a number of landfills and hazardous sites around areas of town. And so there were some vulnerable communities that lived in and around those areas. But our on-site people needed to be more specific about where those locations are and what those demographic populations were in those areas. And so we were able to utilize EJ Screen to pull those reports and share that information with them. So they were able to take that, go out to the communities and talk specifically with residents as well as some of our on-site support people about the type of aid and type of support that may be able to be provided. And in addition to that, as one of our demographic indicators, we have information about prevalent languages that are in a specific area. And so if we go into an area and it's a heavily Spanish-speaking area, heavily Vietnamese and so forth, EJ Screen enables us to have that information prior to So then we can make sure that whatever information that we're sharing with our residents is translated into the most prevalent languages that are in that area. And so those are just a few of the things that we utilize EJ Screen for. In addition to that, it's a publicly available tool. So anyone in the community can access it, can utilize it. We have a really good tutorial on our website that kind of walks you through how you are able to navigate that tool. And then, of course, here in Region 6, we provide additional support as needed if there are any additional questions about the data that you're looking at and information that you're trying to pull. In terms of response, this is one of the tools that we'll use if there's limited information from our residents. And we obviously like to prioritize talking with the community first because they're there in person and they're on the ground, so they can tell you specifically about what they're seeing, the issues that they're dealing with. But when we want to get a little bit deeper about, is there a specific facility that may be cause for concern, or is there a specific area that we need to focus in on, we need more information so that we can provide the support that's needed, we'll utilize EJ Screen as one of our tools to do that. And so with that being said, I do want to point out that there are some limitations to EJ Screen. Obviously, we don't use this tool to determine if a community is an EJ community, anything along those lines. This is specifically used to determine if there are any vulnerabilities for a certain area and for for a specific group. That's primarily what we use it for. It's not used to make final decisions about whether or not a concern from a community is in fact a concern. It's really just to give us a baseline analysis of what we're looking at in that area, and then based on that, we will work with our other partners and work with our other programs within the agency as needed, depending on what the media is, to address those specific things. And so I think that EJ Screen has been beneficial to us, especially on the front end of disaster response, and giving us a good idea of what we're looking at when we're going into an area, and a good starting point. And so, again, I would just like to say if you all would like to access that information, EJ Screen is available at our website, and there are a number of other indicators that we didn't talk about today, but we have a number of different indicators that touch on a gamut of things that could be beneficial as an additional tool as needed. So, yeah.
Thank you. So yes, it is a tool. It is one of the tools we use. It is, and I would suggest it is available to the public, so you can go yourself to the EPA website where you can access it and play with it. Now, we do have a small cadre of staff in the office ongoing. So we're fortunate to have Omari as one of our team members. It's just a handful of us, so it's not many of us. But when something does happen, such as it happened with Hurricane Harvey, and not only Harvey, but then also came Maria, and not only that, but also came fires in California, for example, that year, where EPA is challenged to the point where we need help ourselves. So we look only not only internally in the region in Dallas, we also look to the regions out in the rest of the nation. So EPA regions 1 through 10. So we do get help, and we did get help during the response when Harvey came. So we had a number of staff spread out from Corpus Christi to Beaumont. Now, I mentioned earlier that when we do respond, there are certain things we do, but we do work within the function of the incident command structure. So we respond to that chain. So we do go out there, we talk with people, we bring back feedback. Sometimes we heard simple things such as I went to the county office. I needed some information because my house flooded. I was afraid to get in the house, but I didn't know what to do, and I didn't get information. So sometimes we hear that ourselves. For some reason or another, one of those local agencies is not able to provide that help, but here we can. We work with the state, we work with other jurisdictions, and we try to bring that help. And that's how we kind of operated throughout Harvey in the different areas where we operated back in that year. So, but we do have EJ embedded in the emergency response itself, in the structure of that emergency response, even if informal. And I will talk a little more about that in a second. You may have read in the summertime, the Inspector General released a report based on an audit that they did of EPA's response during Harvey, involving assessments by EPA of water infrastructure facilities such as drinking water, wastewater facilities, sorry about that, keeps happening. And one of the things that they audited was the outreach component of EPA's response during that time. And the report issued some recommendations that EPA Region 6 agreed with and committed to work on for the next several months, year and a half, to improve what we do when we in EPA respond to an emergency, but in a more effective way. So we thought that we were doing as good a job as we could during the emergencies where we have been participating. And we thought that we were doing as much as we could in the way that we could. There's always room to do more, to do better. There's always room for improvement. So we took that in that light. One of the things, as part of the recommendations from the IG report, is to include EJ outreach as part of preparation exercises, verifying the use of vulnerable communities to conduct those exercises, and so that we know that the response is considering the impact and the assistance that we can provide during an emergency. Also, in light of that, results from those exercises, based on the recommendations, that we would incorporate lessons learned so that we could improve actual responses and be more effective as we reach out and bring help where help is needed. Another recommendation, something that we had already been doing, was to hold regular calls with affected communities to identify and work on concerning issues. And those issues will be provided to the incident command for evaluation, such as, for example, when we were responding to Harvey back in 2017, and we held those calls. We got feedback during those calls. We followed up separately with those that we needed to contact, and we relayed information to the state in many cases. We followed up with the state in terms of that information and any actions related to that, and then fed back to the residents on the one hand, so that we would make sure that they got the help. On the other hand, so that we knew that that help was worked as it was anticipated to work. Also, the recommendation, one of the other recommendations is to establish a management objective within the structure. Now, what does that mean is that when, for example, EPA is activated by FEMA in terms of one of the emergency support functions that EPA is formally tasked with, one of them is called number 10, EJ when you look at that emergency support function as part of the FEMA structure, you don't see EJ written in the way that EPA is activated. However, by establishing a management objective as part of that response, then it becomes embedded. And what that does is not only makes sure that we are connecting EJ with the responses, but that we are also following up in an organized way when, for example, we have hot washes and things like that, and we try to understand how that response by EPA based on that emergency support function 10, how did that work? EJ is a specific component based on that emergency objective, following those recommendations from the IG report, and that helps us improve. Another recommendation associated with the IG report was EJ to be part of the incident management team training. In other words, when we were responding during Harvey, during ITC, Chemco, and so on, we were doing it with a small cadre of team that it's normally aware and works with communities in sensitive ways. But we also need to make or raise awareness amongst those that are in the structure, in the management positions, in execution positions, that they also have a similar basic understanding of what EJ is, what EJ does, what EJ is supposed to do with respect to that organized response. One of the things that were part of the recommendations was to provide contact information in terms of LEPC to communities where we serve, and we've done that already. One challenge with that in some areas, such as in Harris County, and going to the TCEQ website and taking a look at all of the listed LEPC facilities, or committees rather, in Harris County, there are 19 of them. Now, not all of them are necessarily active, from what I understand. In about half of those are in the east part of Harris County. But when we try to provide that sort of information to communities for them to be able to work with those that are close to them and get information, get help, and those kinds of things, it could be a very difficult thing for residents in a community to act on that information, because number one, where does that LEPC serve within that small geography of Harris County? So that's something that while we are providing and letting communities know this is the LEPC that we know of based on the list that TCEQ maintains, we want to be pragmatic about it. So we want to go beyond that and making sure that that contact, that information is of practical use for them. So I think there's a little bit of more work we need to do on that, and we'd like to work more with the county in that regard. But another recommendation as part of the report was to produce enough materials that we can distribute and make available to residents so that they know what to do when it comes to a flooded home, when a week has gone by and they want to go back to their homes, carpets are all wet, maybe there's a lot of mildew or mold or what have you inside the house, difficult to breathe, maybe there is no AC, and it's hot, and so on and so forth. There is a lot of information that residents can have and read to be prepared to protect themselves when they are going possibly to put themselves in harm's way when they try to go back to one of those flooded homes. So Mary mentioned the use of EJ Screen, and one of the things that EJ Screen does in that regard is when it comes to languages, for example, and we're going to give information to a community that maybe speaks largely Spanish or Vietnamese. Well, we don't want to provide information that they are not able to read. So we want to make sure that we have information available to them that they are able to use, whatever the language. So we've done that to an extent. So now the other thing that is difficult in terms of producing outreach materials is that we never know when things are going to happen and where they're going to happen. So This month, this year, actually, maybe 4 weeks ago, we had a landfall of a storm here in the Texas coast area, but it could be also in the Louisiana area. It could be just in sectors of each of those states, and we don't know which communities are affected. So we kind of have to wait until almost things are hitting so that we can best hone in on what it is that we are facing so we can be best prepared and we are not necessarily providing information to communities that don't need it. And that we also deploy resources to where they're needed the most. So a lot of this information may not necessarily be printed, but it is digitally available and we can print it very quickly. And if we need it in one language or another, hopefully we have that already that we can also print it in that given language. So we just gave you some glimpses of some of the things we do with respect to environmental justice in emergency response by EPA Region 6 as we work with many of our partners throughout the 5 states where we work with. A lot of the volume of the work with respect to that is in Texas, is in Louisiana, for obvious reasons. In Harris County, the density of facilities that you have, that you guard yourselves to be protected in terms of the public health and the environment. We know that that's an important concern in Harris County, in the Houston area, in Galveston County, and so on and so forth. We'd like to answer some questions if you have those questions. Rod? Yes.
I was wondering about kind of jurisdictional lines and chain of command during emergency response. So I've gotten conflicting information depending on who I ask. How are you all, what do you all have to get involved?
For us to get involved, a phone call or an email. And I think, I don't know if my name was in the, well, first of all, you have my email and you have my phone number. But in terms of how do we work as part of a unified command, for example, there is one person that is in charge of that unified command, and there's a system to it. So I think what we could do, when we hear your concern, we immediately work within our regional incident command team. We make sure that we have either the information flowing to the right contact and eliciting a response back, and eventually maybe ask you to reach out to that contact and work directly, or sometimes we may just simply do whatever it is that you are asking us to help with and provide that feedback to you. But we can be your first element of contact if you want us to help in any way, whether the help is going to come from the state or whether it's going to come from Harris County or from the fire marshal or what have you. If you contact us and we follow up on what it is that you're asking us to do and we get back to you, you're going to know. Okay? So systems are very complex. Sometimes we work under the auspice of the fire marshal because they have asked assistance from EPA, but sometimes it may be part of some sort of combined command, such as a unified command. When Harvey was happening, for example, there are many agencies responding, and there are many jurisdictional issues with respect to things that are happening. Not everything, for example, environmental is necessarily of the purview of EPA. Many things are, but maybe they are a purview of the state. And if they are a purview of the state, maybe they are part of the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, but maybe it's another agency. Maybe it's a Texas General Land Commission, or office rather, or maybe it's the Texas Railroad Commission, or maybe it's another agency. But to make it simple, if you reach out to us in our office, our phone number, our email, it could be my email, it could be anybody's email. Right now, I just posted mine there. We will follow up on that information. We do act on it, and we do, and you should expect a prompt response.
You can be contacted by local government or state government.
We could be contacted by anyone.
Act at their
Give me an example.
Well, you talked about Kimco, you were
Right.
contacted by the fire
Right.
marshal.
Okay.
So that would be local government contacting you for help. It doesn't have to go through the state first.
I'm not aware of how that works. I do know that the fire marshal requested assistance from EPA.
Okay.
And I know that EPA Region 6 responded. Now, the request for assistance was limited to certain things. One of them I know was monitoring, air monitoring, I think. So that happened. Now, the one thing that we were doing ourselves in EJ was, in terms of the EJ network, the persons in that network, we provided, we send emails daily, and we send updates to what was being done. And so when the response is happening, whoever is managing that response, reports are produced. The information is filtered so that only the information that is of practical use to those that want to know what's going on, at some point in time, that is cleared. And we put that information in an email and we send it to that EJ network. Now, when you get that information, sometimes we got calls independently of the email as a result of that, asking us for additional information. So we acted on that. Either we found out what type of monitoring was being done, if somebody wanted to know what is being monitored, what kind of pollutant is being measured. Sometimes it was about, is monitoring still on? And so we would follow up and provide that information back. But that email should have, and I think it did have, contact information for you all to call back and ask questions or make requests and things like that. I think Harris County, some of the members of Harris County received some of those emails. I think the likes of Juan Parras, I see him in the back. I think his group got those kinds of emails. So we try to make the emails as widely available as possible and as relevant as possible. And the more we can improve that EJ network, the better. So it is as good as we have it, and with that caveat.
Okay, thank you.
So,
Arturo, so could an individual request to be made part of that EJ network and receive those kind of emails, or does it have to go through an organization of some sort?
So what we try to do in EJ is to connect. So if you have a request, if you have a complaint, if you have any concerns, and you let us know, as we understand the issue to be as part of an activity such as a response, yes, we process it. Okay, we process it, and then you should get a response back. Yes. Any other questions? I hope that was helpful. Thank you.